Chapter 22 Principles of Insurance. In this chapter,
we shall learn about the basic principles that govern the working of insurance. The chapter is divided into two sections. The first section deals with the elements of insurance and the second section deals with the special features of an insurance contract. A. Elements of insurance. B. Insurance contract legal aspects. C. Insurance contract special features. After studying this chapter, you should be able to 1. Define the various elements of insurance. 2. Define the features of an insurance contract. 3. Identify the special features of an insurance contract.
We have seen that the process of insurance has 4 elements: asset, risk pooling, insurance contract. Let us now look at the various elements of the insurance process in some detail. 1. Asset. An asset may be defined as anything that confers some benefit and has an economic value to its owner. An asset must have the following features. A. Economic value. An asset must have economic value. Value can rise in 2 ways. A. Income generation. Asset may be productive and generate income. A machine used to manufacture biscuits, or a cow that yield milk, both generate income for their owner. A healthy worker is an asset to an organization. B. Serving needs. An asset can also add value by satisfying one or a group of needs. A refrigerator cools and preserves food while a car provides comfort and convenience in transportation. Similarly, a body free of illness adds value to oneself and family also. B. Scarcity and ownership. What about air and sunlight? Are they not assets? The answer is no. Indeed, few things are as valuable as air and sunlight. We cannot live without them. Yet they are not considered as assets in the economic sense of the term. There are 2 reasons for this: their supply is abundant and not scarce. They are not owned by any one individual but are freely available to all. This implies that an asset must satisfy 2 more conditions to qualify as such: its scarcity and its ownership or possession by someone. C. Insurance of assets. In insurance we are interested in economic losses that arise from unexpected and fortuitous events, not losses arising as a result of natural wear and tear. Insurance provides protection only against financial losses arising from unexpected events and not natural wear and tear of assets due to usage over time. We must note that insurance cannot protect an asset from loss or damage. An earthquake will destroy a house whether it is insured or not. The insurer can only pay a sum of money, which will reduce the economic impact of the loss. Losses can arise in the event of breach of an agreement. An exporter will lose a great deal if the importer on the other side refuses to accept the goods or defaulted on payments. D. Life insurance. What about our lives? There is indeed nothing as valuable to us as our own lives and those of our loved ones. Our lives can be seriously affected when subject to an accident or an illness. This can impact in 2 ways. Firstly, there are costs of treatment of a particular disease. Secondly, there may be loss of economic earnings, both due to death or disability. These kinds of losses are covered by insurances of the person or personal lines of insurance. Insurance is possible for anyone who has assets that have value, i.e., which generate income or meet some needs, the loss of which, due to fortuitous or accidental events, cause a financial loss that can be measured in terms of money. Thus these assets are commonly referred to as subject matter of insurance in insurance parlance. 2. Risk. The second element in the process of insurance is the concept of risk. We shall define risk as the chance of a loss. Risk thus refers to the likely loss or damage that can arise on account of happening of an event. We do not usually expect our house to burn down or our car to have an accident. Yet it can happen. Examples of risk are the possibility of economic loss arising from the burning of a house or a burglary or an accident which result in the loss of a limb. This has 2 implications. Firstly, it means that the loss may or may not happen. The chance or likelihood of loss can be expressed mathematically. 1 in a thousand chances that a house will catch fire sama dengan 1/1000 sama dengan 0,001. 3 in a thousand chances that Ram will have a heart attack sama dengan 3/1000 sama dengan 0,003. Risk always implies a probability. Its value always lies between 0 and 1, wherein 0 represents certainty that a loss will not happen while 1 represents certainty that it will happen. Secondly, the event, whose occurrence actually leads to the loss, is known as a peril. It is the cause of the loss. Examples of perils are fire, earthquakes, floods, lightning, burglary, heart attack etc. What about natural wear and tear? It is true that nothing lasts forever. Every asset has a finite lifetime during which it is functional and yield benefits. At some future date its value becomes nil. This is a natural process and we discard or change our mobiles, our washing machines and our clothes when they are worn out. Therefore losses arising out of normal wear and tear are not covered in insurance. Exposure to risk, occurrence of apparel need not necessarily lead to a loss. A person staying in Mumbai does not suffer any loss due to a flood in coastal Andhra. For loss to happen the asset must be exposed to car accident. An insurer will be interested in a population of car that are exposed to the peril caused accident during a certain year. A car regularly used for racing purposes cannot be part of this population. It must form part of a separate group of racing cars whose chances of accident are higher than ordinary car. Exposure to risk alone is not enough ground for insurance compensation. A fire may break out in factory premises without causing actual damage. Insurance comes into play only if there is an actual economic, financial loss as a result of a peril. Degree of risk exposure. Two assets may be exposed to the same peril but the likelihood of loss or the amount of loss may vary greatly. A vehicle carrying explosives can yield far greater loss from fire than tanker carrying water. Similarly, the probability of a person having a respiratory problem is high in a polluted city or the individual engaged in horse racing has a higher risk of accidental injury than one who sits in a shop. Insurers are mainly concerned with the degree of risk exposure. When it is very high we say that it is a bad risk. Basis of risk classification A. Extent of damage likely to be suffered. This is given by the degree of loss and its impact on an individual or business. On this basis one may identify three types of risk events or situations. Critical or catastrophic where losses are of such a magnitude that may result in total loss or bankruptcy. An earthquake that completely destroys a village, a major fire that completely destroys a multi-crore installation, a situation like the terrorist attack of 9/11 on World Trade Center which caused injuries to many people. Major in which the possible losses may result in serious financial losses, compelling the firm to borrow in order to continue operations. A fire in the plant of a large multinational company at Gurgaon destroys inventory worth 1 Rs crore. The loss is heavy but not so high as to lead to bankruptcy. A major kidney transplant operation whose cost is prohibitive. Marginal, insignificant where the possible losses are insignificant and can be easily met from an individual or a firm's existing assets or current income without imposing any undue financial strain. A minor car accident result in the site being slightly grass due to which some of the paint is damaged and a fender is slightly bent. An individual suffering from common cold and cough. B. Nature of risk environment. Another basis for classifying risk is by the nature of the environment. Static risk. Static risk refer to events taking place within a stable environment. They have a regular pattern of occurrence over time and can be reasonably predicted. They are thus easier to insure. Typically such risks are caused by natural events. Examples are fire, earthquake, death, accident and sickness. Dynamic risk typically refer to perils that affect the social environment and result from economic and social factor. They are called dynamic because they don't necessarily have a regular pattern of occurrence and cannot be predicted like static risk. Again, these risks often have vast national and social consequences and may affect a large section of people. Examples are unemployment, inflation, war and political upheavals. Insurance companies in general do not insure dynamic risk. Who is affected? A third way of classifying risk may be provided by considering who is affected by a particular peril or loss event. Fundamental risks affect large populations. Their impact is widespread and tends to be catastrophic. Examples of fundamental or systemic risks are wars, droughts, floods and earthquakes and terrorist attacks. Particular risks affect only specific individuals and not an entire community or group. In this case the loss is borne only by particular individuals and not the entire community or group. Examples of particular risks are burning of a house or an automobile accident or hospitalization following an accident. Commercial insurance is available to cover both fundamental and particular risks. Result, consequence, outcome. Speculative risk describes a situation in which the consequence can be either a profit or a loss. Typical examples of taking such risks are gambling on horses or stock market speculation. One assumes such risk deliberately in the hope of a gain. Poor risk on the other hand involves situations in which the outcomes can result only in loss or no loss, but never in gain. For example, a flood or a fire either occurs or does not occur. If it happens there is a loss. If it does not happen there is neither loss nor gain. Similarly, a person may or may not fall seriously ill. Insurance only applies in case of poor risk, where it protects against loss that may arise. Examples of speculative risk: chemical, fire, explosion, natural, earthquake, flood, cyclone, social, riots, fraud, theft, technical, machinery breakdown, personal, death, disability, sickness, hazard. We have seen above that mere exposure to a peril need not cause a loss. Again, a loss need not be severe. The condition or conditions which increase the probability of a loss or its severity, and thus impact as the risk is known as hazard. When insurer make an assessment of the risk, it is generally with reference to the hazard to which the asset is subject. Let us now give some examples of the link between assets, peril and hazard. If peril is cancer, hazard is EXCSSIVE. Smoking. If peril is fire, hazard is EXCSSIVE. EXPLOSIVE. Material UNATTENDED. If peril is car, ACCIDENT. Hazard is EXCSSIVE. CARLESSDRIVING. Types of hazard. A. Physical hazard is a physical condition that increases the chance of loss. Defective wiring in a building. Indulging in water sports. Leading a sedentary lifestyle. B. Moral hazard refers to dishonesty or character defects in an individual that influence the frequency or severity of the loss. A dishonest individual may attempt to commit fraud and make money by misusing the facility of insurance. A classic instance of moral hazard is purchasing insurance for a factory and then burning it down to collect the insurance amount or buying health insurance after onset of a major ailment. C. Legal hazard is more prevalent in cases involving a liability to pay for damages. It arises when certain features of the legal system or regulatory environment can increase the incidence or severity of losses. The enactment of law governing workmen's compensation in the case of accidents can raise the amount of liability payable considerably. A major concern in insurance is the relationship between risk and associated hazard. Assets are classified into various risk categories on this basis, and the price charged for insurance coverage, known as the premiums, will increase if the susceptibility to loss, arising as a result of the presence of associated hazard, is high. 3. Mathematical principle of insurance, risk pooling. The third element in insurance is a mathematical principle that makes insurance possible. It is known as the principle of risk pooling. Suppose there are 100,000 houses exposed to the risk of fire that can cause an average loss of 5,000 Rs. If the chance of a house catching fire is 2 in 1,000, or 0,002, it will mean that the total amount of loss suffered will be 1,000,000 Rs, sama dengan 50.000 kali 0,002 x 100.000. If an insurer were to get the owners of each of the 100,000 houses to contribute 1,000 Rs, and if these contributions were to be pooled into a single fund, it will be enough to pay for the loss of the unfortunate few who suffered from the fire. The required amount of individual contribution is evident from the calculation below. 100,000 kali 100 sama dengan 1,000,000 Rs. To ensure that there is equity, fairness among all those being insured, it is necessary that the houses shall all be similarly exposed to the risk. How exactly does the principle work in insurance? Siam, who has a factory, with plant, machinery and inventory worth 70 Rs lakhs, wants to insure them with an insurer. The chance that there will be loss or damage to the factory and its contents from fire or other insured perils is 7 out of 1,000,007. Both Siam and the insurer are aware about this. How are their positions different and why do Siam want to insure? Siam's position, the probability of loss 0,007 is of little use to Siam since it only suggests that on average about 7 out of 1,000 factories like his will be impacted by the loss. He does not know whether his factory will be one among the unfortunate 7. In fact, nobody can predict if the particular factory will suffer a loss. Siam may be said to be in a state of uncertainty. Not only does he not know the future, he cannot even predict what it will be. It is obviously a cause for anxiety. Insurer's position. Let us now look at the insurer's position. When Siam's risk of loss is combined and pooled with that of dozens of others, who are exposed to similar situation, it now becomes finite and predictable. The insurer need not worry about Shams factory as much as the latter does. It is enough that only 7 out of 1000 factories be subject to the loss. So long as the actual losses are same or nearly same as the expected, the insurer can meet them by drawing money from the pool of funds. It is by pooling number of risks of all the insured similarly placed and exposed to possibility of loss due to a peril that the insurer is able to assume that risk and its the law of large number the probability of damage, derived as 7 out of 1000 or 0.007 in the example above, forms the basis on which the premium is determined. The insurer will face no risk of loss if the actual experience was as expected. In such a situation the premiums of the numerous insured will be sufficient to completely compensate for the losses of those who have been affected by the peril. The insurer will however face a risk if the actual experience was more adverse than expected and the premiums collected were not sufficient to pay the claims. How can the insurer be sure about its predictions? This becomes possible because of a principle known as the law of large number. It states that the larger the size of the pool of risk, the actual average of losses will be closer to the estimated or expected average loss. To give a simple illustration, the probability of getting heads on a toss of the coin is setengah. But how sure can you be that you will actually get 2 heads if you toss the coin 4 times? Only when the number of tosses gets very large and closer to infinity, the chance of getting heads on for every 2 tosses will become closer to 1. It follows that insurer can be sure of their ground only when they have been able to insure a large number of insured. An insurer who has insured only a few hundred houses, likely will be worse affected than one who has insured several thousand houses. Conditions for insuring a risk. When does it make sense to insure a risk from the insurer's point of view? 6 broad requirements for a risk to be considered insurable are given in the box below. A sufficiently large number of homogeneous, similar exposure units to make the losses reasonably predictable. This follows from the law of large number. Without this it will be difficult to make predictions. Loss produced by the risk must be definite and measurable. It is difficult to decide the compensation if one cannot say for sure that a loss has occurred and how much it is. Loss must be fortuitous or accidental. It must be the result of an event that may or may not happen. The event must be beyond the control of insurer. No insurer will cover a loss that is intentionally caused by the insurer. If sharing of losses of the few by money can work only if a small percentage of the insured group suffers loss at any given period of time. Economic feasibility, the cost of insurance must not be high in relation to the possible loss, otherwise the insurance will be economically unviable. Public policy, finally the contract shall not be contrary to public policy and morality. 4. The insurance contract. The fourth element of insurance is that it involves a contractual agreement in which the insurer agrees to provide financial protection against specific risk for a price or consideration known as the premium. The contractual agreement takes the form of legal aspects. 1. Legal aspects of an insurance contract. We will now look at some features involved in an insurance contract and then consider legal principles that govern insurance contracts in general. We have already seen that one of the elements of insurance is that it involves a contract between insurer and insured. A contract is an agreement between parties, enforceable at law. The provisions of the Indian Contract Act 1872 govern all contracts in India, including insurance contracts. 2. Elements of a valid contract. The elements of a valid contract are a. Offer and acceptance. Usually, the offer is made by the proposer, and acceptance is made by the insurer. B. Consideration. This means that the contract must involve some mutual benefit to the parties. The premium is the consideration from the insurer, and the promise to indemnify is the consideration from the insurer. C. Agreement between the parties. Both the parties shall agree to the same thing in the same sense. D. Capacity of the parties. Both the parties to the contract must be legally competent to enter into the contract. For example, minor cannot enter into insurance contracts. Legality. The object of the contract must be legal. For example, no insurance can be had for smuggled goods. The following cannot be an element of insurance contract. Coercion involves pressure applied through criminal means. Undue influence. When a person, who is able to dominate another, uses her position, influence or power to obtain undue advantage. Fraud when a person induces another to act on a false belief that is caused by a representation he or she does not believe to be true. It can arise either from deliberate concealment of facts or through misrepresenting them. If, mistake error in judgment or interpretation of an event. This can lead to an error in understanding and agreement about the
Insurance
subject
contract,
matter of
special
contract. Features. Let us look at the special features of an insurance contract. 1. Indemnity. The principle of indemnity is applicable to non-life insurance policies. It means that the policyholder, who suffers a loss, is compensated so as to put him or her in the same financial position as he or she was before the occurrence of the loss event. The insurance contract, evidence through insurance policy, guarantees that the insured will be indemnified or compensated up to the amount of loss and no more. The philosophy is that one shall not make a profit through insuring one's assets and recovering more than the loss. The insurer will assess the economic value of the loss suffered and compensate accordingly. Ram has insured his house, worth Rs. 10 lakhs, for the full amount. He suffers loss on account of fire estimated at Rs. 70,000. The insurance company will pay him an amount of Rs. 70,000. The insurer can claim no further amount. Consider a situation now where the property has not been insured for its full value. One will then be entitled to indemnity for loss only in the same proportion as one's insurance. Suppose the house, worth Rs. 10 lakhs has only been insured for a sum of Rs. 5 lakhs. If the loss on account of fire is Rs. 60,000, one cannot claim this entire amount. It is deemed that the house owner has insured only to the tune of half its value and he is thus entitled to claim just 50%, Rs. 30,000, of the amount of loss. This is also known as underinsurance. The measurement of indemnity to be paid will depend on the type of insurance one takes. In most types of non-life insurance policies, which deal with insurance of property and liability, the insured is compensated to the extent of actual amount of loss i.e., the amount of money needed to replace loss or damaged property at current market prices less depreciation. Indemnity may take one or more of the following modes of settlement: cash payment, repair of a damaged item, replacement of the loss or damaged item, restoration, reinstatement, for example, rebuilding a house destroyed by fire. Diagram 2, indemnity both. There is some subject matter whose value cannot be easily estimated or ascertained at the time of loss. For instance, it may be difficult to put a price in the case of family heirlooms or rare artifacts. Similarly, in marine insurance policies it may be difficult to estimate the extent of loss suffered in a ship accident halfway around the world. In such instances, a principle known as the agreed value is adopted. The insurer and insured agree on the value of the property to be insured, at the beginning of the insurance contract. In the event of total loss, the insurer agrees to pay the agreed amount of the policy. This type of policy is known as agreed value policy, G. Subrogation follows from the principle of indemnity. Subrogation means the transfer of all rights and remedies, with respect to the subject matter of insurance, from the insured to the insurer. It means that if the insured has suffered from loss of property caused due to negligence of a third party and has been paid indemnity by the insurer for that loss, the right to collect damages from the negligent party will lie with the insurer. Note that the amount of damage that can be collected is only to the extent of amount paid by the insurance company. Subrogation, it is the process an insurance company uses to recover claim amounts paid to a policyholder from a negligent third party. Subrogation can also be defined as surrender of rights by the insured to an insurance company that has paid a claim against the third party. Kishore's household goods were being carried in Sylvine Transport Service. They got damaged due to driver's negligence, to the extent of 45,000 Rs and the insurer paid an amount of 30,000 Rs to Kishore. The insurer stands subrogated to the extent of only 30,000 Rs and can collect that amount from Sylvine Transports. Suppose, the claim amount is for 45,000 Rs, insurer is indemnified by the insurer for 40,000 Rs, and the insurer is able to recover under subrogation 45,000 Rs from Sylvine Transports, then the balance amount of 5,000 Rs will have to be given to the insurer. This prevents the insurer from collecting twice for the loss, once from the insurance company and then again from the third party. Subrogation arises only in case of contracts of indemnity. Suresh dies in an air crash. His family is entitled to collect the full sum assured of 50 Rs lakhs from the insurer who have issue a personal accident policy plus the compensation paid by the airline, say, 15 Rs lakhs. Contribution. This principle is applicable to only non-life insurance. Contribution follows from the principle of indemnity, which implies that one cannot gain more from insurance than one has lost through the peril. That if the same property is insured with more than one insurance company, the compensation paid by all the insurer together cannot exceed the actual loss suffered. If insurer were to collect the amount of the loss from each insurer fully, insurer will make a profit from the loss. This will violate the principle of indemnity. Skenario 1. Srinivas takes out a fire policy on his house value at Rs. 24 lakhs with 2 insurance companies. He insures it 4 lakhs with each company. When the house is partially damaged in a fire, the loss is estimated at Rs. 6 lakhs. He claims Rs. 6 lakhs each from the 2 insurer. The 2 insurer decline to give him Rs. 6 lakhs each. They take the position that since each of them are deemed to have shared in the insurance to the extent of 50%, each will pay 50% of the loss fees. Lakhs each, thus ensuring that the insured gets no more than the value of the actual loss. Skenario 2. Rishi has taken 2 mediclaim policies for self, 2 Rs, 50,000 from X company and for 1 Rs, 50,000 from Y company. Rishi has incurred an expense of 1 Rs, 60,000 on hospitalization following an ailment. This compensation of 1 Rs, 60,000 will be shared and paid by both the companies on rateable proportion basis. The share of each company will be X company, 1, 60,000 kali 2, 50,000, 2, 50,000 plus 1, 50,000, sama dengan 1 Rs, 0,000 Y company, 1, 60,000 kali 150,000, 2, 50,000 plus 1, 50,000, sama dengan 60 Rs, 0,000, 2. Uberima fides or utmost good fight. There is a difference between good fight and utmost good fight. A. Good fight. All commercial contracts in general require that good fight shall be observed in their transaction and there shall be no fraud or deceit. Apart from this legal duty to observe good fight, the seller is not bound to disclose any information about the subject matter of the contract to the buyer. The rule observed here is that of cavit emptor, which means buyer beware. The parties to the contract are expected to examine the subject matter of the contract and so long as one party does not mislead the other and the answers are given truthfully, there is no question of the other party avoiding the contract. Chandrasekhar goes to a TV showroom and is obsessed by a fanciful brand of TV with many features. The salesperson knows from experience that the particular brand is not very reliable and has in the past given rise to problems for other customers. He does not reveal this for fear that it might jeopardize the sale. Can he be charged of the cheat? Would the situation have been different if the salesman had been asked about the reliability of the brand and had replied that it was very reliable? B. Utmost good fight. Insurance contracts stand on a different footing. The proposer has a legal duty to disclose all material information about the subject matter of insurance to the insurer who do not have this information. Material information is that information which enables the insurer to decide whether they will accept the risk, if so, at what rate of premium and subject to what terms and conditions. This legal duty of utmost good fight arises under common law. The duty applies not only to material facts which the proposer knows, but also extends to material facts which he ought to know. Insurance contracts are subject to a higher obligation. When it comes to insurance, good fight contracts become utmost good fight contracts. The concept of uberima fides is defined as involving a positive duty to voluntarily disclose, accurately and fully all facts material to the risk being proposed, whether requested or not. What is meant by complete disclosure? The law imposes an obligation to disclose all material facts. Misleading of facts by the insured. An executive is suffering from hypertension and has had a mild heart attack recently, following which he decides to take a medical policy but does not reveal his true condition. The insurer is thus duped into accepting the proposal due to misrepresentation of facts by insurer. Misleading of facts by the insurer. An individual has a congenital hole in the heart and reveals the same in the proposal form. The same is accepted by the insurer and proposer is not informed that pre-existing diseases are not covered for at least 4 years. C. Material fact has been defined as a fact that will affect the judgment of an insurance underwriter in deciding whether to accept the risk and if so, the rate of premium and the terms and conditions. Whether an undisclosed fact was material or not will depend on the circumstances of the individual case and could be decided ultimately only in a court of law. The insurer has to disclose of the types of material facts in insurance that one needs to disclose. Facts indicating that the particular risk represents a greater exposure than normal. Examples are hazardous nature of cargo being carried at sea, past history of illness. Existence of past policies taken from all insurer and their present status. All questions in the proposal form or application for insurance are considered to be material, as they relate to various aspects of the subject matter of insurance and its exposure to risks. They need to be answered truthfully and be full in all respects. The following are some examples of material facts. Fire insurance, construction of the building, occupancy, e.g. office, residence, shop, warehouse, manufacturing unit, etc. The nature of goods stored, manufactured, non-hazardous, hazardous, extra-hazardous, etc. Marine insurance, method of packing. Whether in single gunny bags or double gunny bags, whether in new drums or second-hand drums, etc. The nature of goods, e.g. whether the machinery is new or second-hand. Motor insurance, cubic capacity of engine, private car, the year of manufacture, carrying capacity of a truck, tonnage, the purpose for which the vehicle is used, the geographical area in which it is used. If personal accident insurance, the exact nature of occupation, ag height and weight, physical disabilities, etc. V. Health insurance, any operations undergone if suffering from diabetes or hypertension. V. Common features, the fact that previous insurer had rejected the proposal or charged extra premium, or cancelled, or refused to renew the policy. Previous losses suffered by the proposal, unless asked for by insurer. It is also held that unless there is a specific inquiry by underwriters, the proposer has no obligation to disclose the following facts. Measure implemented to reduce the risk. Example, the presence of a fire extinguisher. Facts unknown to the insured. Example, an individual who suffers from high blood pressure but was unaware of it at the time of taking the policy, cannot be charged with non-disclosure of this fact. Facts which could be discovered by reasonable diligence. It is not necessary to disclose every minute material fact. The underwriters must be conscious enough to ask for the same if they require further information. If matter of law, everybody is supposed to know the law of the land. Example, municipal laws about storing of explosives. V. About which insurer appears to be indifferent, or has waived the need for further information. The insurer cannot later disclaim responsibility on grounds that the answers were incomplete. V. Facts possible for discovery, like when a medical examiner on behalf of an insurer takes BP measurements in a medical examination before taking off the policy. D. Duty of disclosure in non-life insurance. In non-life insurance, the contract will stipulate whether changes are required to be intimated or not. When an alteration is made to the original contract affecting the risk, the duty of disclosure will arise. The duty of disclosing material facts ceases when the contract is concluded by issue of a cover note or a policy. The duty arises again at the time of renewal of the policy, if during the period of the policy, there is any change in the risk. A house owner has insured the building and its contents. He goes on a holiday for a week, no material change in the facts. However, if he built another floor above and starts a beauty parlor, it will considerably alter the risk. Breach of utmost good faith. Let us now consider situations which will involve a breach of utmost good faith. Such breach can arise either through non-disclosure or misrepresentation. Non-disclosure insurer is silent in general about material facts because the insurer has not raised any specific inquiry through evasive answers to questions asked by the insurer may be inadvertent, occurs without one's information or intention, or because the proposer thought that a fact was not material. In such case it is innocent. When a fact is intentionally not disclosed, it is treated as concealment. In this case there is intent to deceive. Misrepresentation. A statement made during negotiation of a contract of insurance is called representation. This may be a definite statement of fact or a statement of belief, intention or expectation. When it is a fact, it is expected to be substantially correct. When it concerns matter of belief or expectation, it must be made in good faith. Misrepresentation is of two kinds. Innocent misrepresentation relates to inaccurate statements, which are made without any fraudulent intention. E.g., an individual who occasionally smokes and is not a habitual smoker may not reveal the same in the proposal form as he does not think it has any bearing on the risk. Fraudulent misrepresentation are false statements made with deliberate intent to deceive the insurer or are made recklessly without due regard for truth. E.g., a chain smoker may deliberately not reveal the fact that he smokes. An insurance contract generally becomes void when there is concealment with intent to deceive, or when there is fraudulent non-disclosure or misrepresentation. In case of other breaches of utmost good faith, the contract may be rendered voidable. For e.g., parents at the time of covering their child in the family floater policy may not be aware that their child has a congenital problem. There is no intent to deceive. 3. Insurable interest. The existence of insurable interest is an essential ingredient of every insurance contract and is considered as the legal prerequisite for insurance. Let us see how insurance differs from a gambling or wager agreement. A. Gambling and insurance consider a game of cards, where one either loses or wins. The loss or gain happens only because the person enter the bet. The person who plays the game has no further interest or relationship with the game other than that he might win the game. Betting or wagering is not legally enforceable in a court of law and thus any contract in pursuance of it will be held to be illegal. In case someone pledges his house if he happens to lose a game of cards, the other party cannot approach the court to ensure its fulfillment. Now consider a house and the event of it burning down. The individual who insures his house has a legal relationship with the subject matter of insurance, the house. He owns it and is likely to suffer financially if it is destroyed or damaged, independent of whether the fire happens or does not happen, and it is the relationship that leads to the loss. The event, fire or theft, will lead to a loss regardless of whether one takes insurance or not. Unlike a card game, where one could win or lose, a fire can have only one consequence, loss to the owner of the house. The owner takes insurance to ensure that the loss suffered is compensated for in some way. The interest that the insured has in his house or his money is termed as insurable interest. The presence of insurable interest makes an insurance contract valid and enforceable under the law. 3 essential elements of insurable interest. 1. There must be property, right, interest, life or potential liability capable of being insured. 2. Sub-property, right, interest, life or potential liability must be the subject matter of insurance. 3. The insured must bear a legal relationship to the subject matter such that he stands to benefit by the safety of the property, right, interest, life or freedom of liability. By the same token, he must stand to lose financially by any loss, damage, injury or creation of liability. Skenario 1. Chandrasekhar owns a house for which he has taken a mortgage loan of 15 Rs lakhs from a bank. Does he have an insurable interest in the house? Does the bank have an insurable interest in the house? What about his neighbor? Skenario 2. Srinivasan has a family consisting of spouse, 2 kids and all parents. Does he have an insurable interest in their well-being? Does he stand to financially lose if any of them are hospitalized? What about his neighbor's kids? Will he have an insurable interest in them? It will be relevant here to make a distinction between the subject matter of insurance and the subject matter of an insurance contract. Subject matter of insurance relates to property being insured against, which has an intrinsic value of its own. Subject matter of an insurance contract on the other hand is the insured's financial interest in that property. It is only when the insured has such an interest in the property that he has the legal right to insure. The insurance policy in the strictest sense covers not the property per se, but the insured's financial interest in the property. Consider the house Wigmer. Chandrasekhar has borrowed with a mortgage loan of 15 Rs lakhs from a bank. If he has repaid 12 lakhs of this amount, the bank's interest will be only to the tune of the balance 3 lakhs which is outstanding. Thus the bank also has an insurable interest financially in the house for the balance amount of loan that is unpaid and will ensure that it is made a co-insure in the policy. If one deliberately sets a fire to one's property and collects claims against losses under the policy, such claims are clearly fraudulent and could be justifiably rejected. B. Time when insurable interest shall be present. In case of fire and accident insurance, insurable interest shall be present both at the time of taking the policy and at the time of loss. In case of health and personal accident insurance apart from self, family can also be insured by the proposer since he stands to insure financial losses if the family meet with an accident or undergoes hospitalization. However, in marine cargo insurance, insurable interest is required only at the time of the legal principles, which applies only to non-life insurance, is the principle of proximate causa. Non-life insurance contracts provide indemnity only if losses that occur are caused by insured perils, which are covered the policy. Determining the actual causa of loss or damage is a fundamental step in the consideration of any claim. Proximate causa is a key principle of insurance and is concerned with how the loss or damage actually occurred and whether it is indeed as a result of an insured peril. Under this rule, insurer looks for the predominant causa which sets into motion the chain of events producing the loss, which may not necessarily be the last event that immediately preceded the loss it is an event which is closest to, or immediately responsible for causing the loss. Unfortunately, when a loss occurs, there will often be a series of events leading up to the incident, and so it is sometimes difficult to determine the nearest or proximate causa. For example, a fire might cause a water pipe to burst. Despite the resultant loss being water damage, the fire will still be considered the proximate causa of the incident. Proximate causa is defined as the active and efficient causa that sets in motion a chain of events which brings about a result, without the intervention of any force started and working actively from a new and independent source. To understand the principle of proximate causa, consider the following situation. Scenario 1, Ajay's car was stolen. 2 days later, the police found the car in a damaged condition. Investigation revealed that the thief had banged the car into a tree. Ajay filed a claim with insurance company for the damages to the car. To Ajay's surprise, the insurance company rejected the claim. The reason given by the insurance company was that theft was the reason for the damage to the car and theft was an excluded peril in the insurance policy that Ajay had taken for his car, and hence insurance company is not liable to pay the claim. Scenario 2, Mer Pinto, while riding a horse, fell on the ground and had his leg broken. He was lying on the wet ground for a long time before he was taken to hospital. Because of lying on the wet ground, he had fever that developed into pneumonia, finally dying of this causa. Though pneumonia might seem to be the immediate causa, in fact it was the accidental fall that emerged as the proximate causa, and the claim was admitted under personal accident insurance. There are certain losses which are suffered by the insured as a result of fire but which cannot be said to be proximately caused by fire. In practice, some of these losses are customarily paid by business under fire insurance policies. Example of such losses can be damage to property caused by water used to extinguish fire, damage to property caused by fire brigade in execution of their duty, damage to property during its removal from a burning building to a safe place.